I'm proud to talk about the Recovering America's Wildlife Act bipartisan legislation, which I introduced with my colleague, Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, to address our nation's biodiversity crisis. And it is a crisis, my friends. An estimated 1/3 of America's wildlife species are at an increased risk of extinction. We're seeing the impact of this on bird populations, which have declined almost 30% in the United States and Canada since 1970. In Michigan and throughout this country, over 40% of freshwater fish are at risk. And so in my home state, known as the Great Lakes State, we're facing unprecedented threats to our environmental heritage. The cost of inaction is immense. The longer we wait to address these issues, the more resources we will ultimately need to safeguard our nation's wildlife. Bold action is needed, and the Recovering America's Wildlife Act meets the moment by funding proactive, on-the-ground conservation efforts to meet the scale of the challenge we face. The legislation provides approximately $1.4 billion in dedicated annual funding to the states, territories, and Native American tribes for proactive conservation efforts for the approximately 12,000 species of wildlife and plants that have been identified under federally approved state wildlife action plans. This historic investment in our nation's wildlife will pay significant dividends. It will allow states to take proactive action that will prevent at-risk species from becoming endangered. And it gives states the power. That's what this does. It empowers the states. It'll grow our $887 billion outdoor economy that supports 7.6 million jobs and is fueled by more than 100 million American hunters, anglers, birders, hikers, and other wildlife enthusiasts. It also supports targeted efforts for our nation's most at-risk species and includes innovative conservation measures to safeguard America's wildlife. And what's really remarkable is that the Recovering America's Wildlife Act has the support of this very broad spectrum of organizations, leading conservation organizations, sportsmen's groups, environmental advocates, and businesses for good reason. It utilized proven funding mechanisms, boldly addresses pressing conservation needs, and prevents the need for more costly interventions in the future. We passed this bill in the Natural Resources Committee last Congress by a vote of 26-6. The majority of Democrats and Republicans voted for it. The updated version of the Recovering America's Wildlife Act includes improvements, including made in the last Congress's Manager's Amendment, which further strengthens the provisions in this bill. We have a conservation, economic, and moral rationale to act in order to protect and recover America's wildlife for future generations. This is an opportunity to take historic action to address a pressing conservation need, and I strongly urge my colleagues to support this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the remainder of my time.